And greetings TTRPG fans and enthusiasts. I'm your host and narrator John, and welcome to Legitcast episode 22. Today we are joined by the creator of the TTRPG Fey Earth, Neil. Greetings my friend, how are you doing? Welcome.
Hey everybody, I'm doing good. Thanks for having me here.
Everyone's joining us on live. If you have any questions, you can feel free to jump and have a live Q&A. If anything is wrong with the sound or any technical difficulties, please do inform us. But I think without any further ado, let me start by saying, as we were saying off screen a moment earlier, that I learned about your story and the Fey Earth story quite many years ago through Twitter, when Twitter was still called Twitter, and it was still a fun place for the TTRPG community and a very active place to be. And since then I've seen you going through campaigns, I've seen some of your actual plays. You're a great GM. I have so many things that I want to get to sink my teeth to, but before we do, first of all, how are you feeling today? And welcome.
I'm good. As I said just before we went live, my daughter is on midterm break, so she's at home all day. And this being Ireland and October, it was raining for most of the day, so we couldn't bring her outside, and she was slowly going crazy.
All right. So let's start with the overview. What is Fey Earth? What's it all about? What's the general idea surrounding it?
Right, so Fey Earth is an indie TTRPG set in an alternate 19th century Earth where all the creatures from folklore and fairy tale are real, have always been real, and have always lived openly alongside humanity. That is my official blurb that I always use. But what it is at its heart is a TTRPG which I have spent at least 10 years now working on, trying to create a game which authentically and faithfully and accurately portrays the folklore, specifically the Fey folklore from European culture. Because the simple fact of the matter is, we've had decades of cultural appropriation, and that is what it is, where Gary Gygax was the first one to do it. He got his hands on a encyclopedia of European folklore when he first started working on Dungeons and Dragons in the 70s, and he literally just went through it, and any names of any creatures that he thought it sounded cool, he said, I'm going to put them in my game, and never once made the slightest attempt to faithfully depict the creatures in Dungeons and Dragons as they were described in their original stories. Whereas every single creature that you will find in Fey Earth, I have worked really hard as I could, to faithfully and accurately depict them in terms of their physical appearance, their personality, their behavior, and their abilities, as was described in stories which were told for centuries, for generations. Like many of the stories that I am working on, many of them were recorded in the 19th century. You had individuals like the Grimm brothers in Germany, Hans Christian Andersen in Denmark, Calvino in Italy, and others like that. There was a resurgence of interest in folklore in the 19th century when a lot of these stories were collected, but they were collecting stories that had been passed on in an oral tradition for countless generations.
Right off the bat, give me an example of a creature that's widely known through Dungeons and Dragons in one certain way, whereas it's not the real way, the actual historical and folklore way that is be described in Fey Earth. Pick anyone you want. Yeah.
I could go with the Banshee from Irish folklore, which I get offended by the depictions of it in popular culture, but instead I'm going to go for one of the most popular creatures in Dungeons and Dragons, and that is the Kobold.
Okay.
Which is nothing at all. I mean, any Germans are just nodding in agreement and laughing right now as I'm saying this. Kobolds are absolutely nothing at all like they are described as in Dungeons and Dragons. Kobolds were a type of what I in my game call a domestic fae. So that's like brownies, hobgoblins, and the like. They were a fairy creature that would live in homes. Kobolds often would live in the palaces and manors of the nobility and the gentry, but they could also be in homes, in mills, and in breweries. Okay, they were incredibly powerful creatures. We don't get many physical descriptions of them, but the few we do get are very small, diminutive figures similar to a dwarf or a gnome, okay? But they were incredibly powerful. There's one story of um I can never remember which German city it was. Um no, it wasn't Cologne. I can't remember, but there was a story I remember reading before of this is the other thing with kobolds. They were almost always invisible. You would never actually see them because they would always use their magic to mask themselves and be invisible. And in one story, a young lad working in some noble's manor estate tricked the kobold into breaking its invisibility and revealing its true form. And the kobold, when it realized what was done, became so enraged it ripped the lad's arm off and beat him to death with it.
Okay.
So that's what the original kobolds were like. Not these 90 centimeter tall weird dragon guys who are
Dragonic
scared of
type.
every
Yeah,
no
servants of
no no
dragons.
no yeah
Okay.
no that's what the original kobold was like. This terrifying creature that was invisible, had immense magical powers and immense physical strength, could literally rip a man's arm off to beat him to death with it. So there's a one of my favorite examples of a creature that has been horribly misrepresented and appropriated in popular culture, in this case in the dragon game, that is nothing at all like the original folklore.
Okay, I think right off the bat you've given me a great, example to see what we are
Mm,
talking about with Fey Earth and how it really differentiates with the
mm.
pop media culture. Amazing, amazing start. So give me, before to get into more depth into the setting and the creatures, give me some of your inspirations while working on Fey Earth.
I mean, like, the first thing you have to remember is I'm Irish, okay? And that is significant because Ireland has some of the most in, uh, the incredible and most wonderful, most rich, and most well preserved folklore in the world, not just in Europe, but in the world. Okay, ask any academic who studies folklore, and they will tell you this. Okay, the Celts in general, the Irish, the Scots, the Welsh, we all like that was one thing that actually really shocked me when I started doing my research was how many regions the stories were lost. Like, once you leave the Celtic nations and the Nordic countries and start going across the rest of Europe, until we get to Eastern Europe, the Slavs really preserve their folklore as well. In fairness, it easily rivals the Celts or the Nordics. But, like, basically, when you're in Western Europe, unless your country or your region had individuals like the Grimm brothers who actively went and collected the stories, so many of the stories are gone. Like, I've I've struggled. I found virtually nothing on Portuguese folklore, for example. Spanish folklore has been incredibly difficult. Um, I've been able to find stuff when I make it regionally specific. So in Catalan, uh, more of their folklore was preserved, but when you go outside of Catalan into other parts of Spain, so many of the stories are lost. And like my day job, I'm a secondary school teacher. Okay, I teach maths and science, and in the secondary school that I work in, every year we would have Spanish teenagers who come over for a year on exchange to learn Irish, or sorry, to learn English. And I remember talking to one of the Spanish kids once before, and this young fella, lovely, lovely guy, incredibly intelligent, brilliant student, but he came from this incredibly rural, remote part of Spain. I'm talking population of maybe 1,000. He was
Oh,
one of 20 people under the age of 40 in his village. Okay, that level of remote rural, somewhere you would think would be a perfect place for these stories. And I was asking him, I was saying how when I was researching, I found it so hard. And he said, "Oh yeah, no, all our stories are gone. All our stories are lost." And I couldn't believe it. Well, like, so what's inspired me was finding the stories, doing the research, and not just in Ireland, because as I said, Ireland has some of the most
hmm.
incredibly well preserved folklore in the world, but going to other places, going to England, going to France, going to Germany, Italy, the lowland countries, that has been the inspiration. And reading these stories, because this is the thing I've discovered as I've studied folklore. I joke with my friends, at this stage I could probably write most of a master's thesis. I've spent so long researching it, but the thing that I've noticed, and the thing that really sets folklore apart from mythology, is when you look at mythology, the characters in myth, they're nobles, they're princes, they're demigods, they're the heroes. They're these mighty figures from myth, from legend, from story, singularly heroic individuals. But when you start looking at folklore, it's the farmer, it's the blacksmith, it's the fisherman, it's the everyday man, it's the housefrau, it's the housewife, it's the midwife, it's the everyday men and women living their lives in these countries, in these cultures. They're not nobles, they're not princes, they're not heroes, they're not trying to be heroes. They're just normal, real people surviving. And when you read these stories about these magical creatures, you get an insight into what life was like for the everyday person in these countries, in these time periods. A lot of the time when you look at these and you're looking at the creatures, the stories of the creatures, their behavior and their abilities, it's often an allegory for what life was like in that time period, and
Yeah.
it gives you insights into what it was like for the normal everyday person, which you don't get with mythology. And that's one of the things I've really grown to love about folklore, and has been a further inspiration for me.
So, just to make sure I get this right, it's not about fake creatures in the traditional sense, which is like the spray, the nymph, the satyr or whatnot. It could also include, for example, in my mind, like the kobold is not traditional fey creatures, but again, it's the misconception from D&D that's a dragonic thing. But does your game also include like demons? Because Banshee is like an undead, and you mentioned the Banshee. Does it include all sorts of folk creatures?
So this is the thing. Sorry to interrupt you, my friend, but the Banshee is not undead. The Banshee in Irish folklore was not an undead creature. Banshee is Irish. It literally means fairy woman. Ban is the Irish for woman. She is the Irish for fairy.
Another
Banshee literally
misconception.
means fairy. Yes, they were
Wow.
not undead. They were actually a type of fairy or elf. They're
Okay.
associated with death because they were harbingers, they were messengers. If you saw the Banshee and heard her scream, then that was a warning that someone you knew, a family member or a close loved one, was about to die. The Banshee did not kill anybody. All she was a messenger. She was not undead. She was a type of elf or fairy. So this is another example that, as an Irishman, really pisses me off. I was like, this is a creature that is such a huge part of my culture, my history, my people, and these idiots, usually from the United States, but not just from the United States, getting it completely fucking wrong all the time. It was like, yeah. Now, with respect to my game, I deliberately did not include celestial or infernal creatures,
Okay.
and there was a couple of reasons for that. The first one being that, as I said, my game is set in an alternate 19th century Earth, so it's a 19th century Victorian era period Earth, which has been changed because of the existence of fairies and magical creatures and magic. So the Industrial Revolution is slightly different, history is slightly different, some of the geography of Europe is slightly different, but in many ways it is still that same 19th century Earth that we know from history. But that also means that the religions in my game are real world religions that people still practice today. Christianity, for example. So I'm not touching religion at all in my game. I'm not going near it at all, because the religions in my game, the religions of the 19th century in Europe, were largely the same religions that Christians still practice to this day. I'm not fucking touching that. So I deliberately kept religion and the heavens and the hells exceptionally vague. So in the setting, you have, if you want to play a mystic, which is the cleric in my game, you could be a mystic who is a Franciscan monk, or maybe a Dominican nun or a Lutheran priest, or an Asatru priest of the Norse religions, because I've like decided, well, we're going to keep the Norse religion around, and a lot of the other animistic practices, they're still being practiced, um, just because it's fun. But so you've got this mixture of different religious things going on. But like the way the religion is described is, so the mystics say that their magic comes from their gods and the spirits of their ancestors and so forth, but they're largely using the same magic that the witches and the druids and the sorcerers are using.
Hmm.
So it's like, well, no one actually knows where magic comes from. The sorcerers view magic as a science to be understood like physics and mathematics. The druids say their magic comes from nature. Witches, their magic comes from the physical components that they use. The mystics from the gods and the angels, but no one knows. So I deliberately kept that vague. So in my game, there are no stat blocks for angels or demons. The closest thing I have to a demon is an imp, which in folklore were sometimes described as devils, but other times described as a type of fairy. And
Hmm.
and the imp in Fey Earth physically is described in the traditional sense of a miniature devil. But what's interesting about imps is when you actually look into the folklore, they were often familiars of witches because of the association with witchcraft and devil worship, but they were sometimes said to be familiars of alchemists too. So they're the closest thing to a devil in the game, and then I deliberately kept religion vague. I just haven't put any rules into it saying, yeah, religion is real, these gods are real, because it was like, it's just not worth it, because I want people to play my game and have fun. But if you're someone who is a practicing Christian, I'm not going to put something in my game that you might find offensive. I mean, I was raised Catholic, obviously. I'm Irish. I'm not a practicing Christian anymore. I'm a tree hugging hippie. I have my own beliefs. I don't try and force them on anybody, but but because of that, I'm not going to try to rewrite other people's actual religions that happen to be in my game because it's set in a period in history when those religions also existed.
Yeah, that makes sense a lot. And in a way, if you remove all the divine and abyssal and headless elements, in a sense, everything that's left could be described as Fey, right?
Mm, mm,
Especially
mm.
if you have the depth of knowledge that you have and you're able to distinct that the Banshee is not the undead, actually. The kobolds is not a dragonic creature, they're all Fey in a sense. So
Yeah.
trolls, I guess like golems. Okay, golem something like on a D&D term, it's a construct. But again, it's
So
folk. It's German, Austrian folk, I think, right?
the golem exists in my game. The golem is actually from Jewish folklore, specifically from the
Jewish,
Czech
yeah.
Republic. The golem originally was from the city of Prague.
From Prey, yeah. Remember from Blood
And yeah,
Vampire,
yeah,
Masquerade Redemption, a game that
yeah.
mentioned it. Yeah.
Yeah. So the golem exists in my game, but it is based on Jewish folklore, and I actually worked with Jewish um, cultural sensitivity consultants. I was actually very proud because when I was talking to the consultants and I was sharing, like, here's my stat block for the creature. What do you think? Is this first of all, is this accurate to the folklore, and secondly, is
Hmm.
it respectful? And one of the consultants got back to me like, this is amazing, and in fact, you found stuff in your research about the golem I didn't even know about. And I was like, whoa,
Ah.
that's so in my game, golems are constructs that are made by rabbis who are also mystics and have magical abilities. But so they're nothing like the golems you're going to find in D&D, Pathfinder, or other games. No, it is specifically based on the golem from Prague, down to the fact that the golem in my game must be allowed rest on the Sabbath, because in the original story,
Hmm.
if the golem was not allowed rest on the Sabbath, it would become maddened and enraged, and the rabbi could no longer control it.
Mm, fascinating.
Yeah.
As a Greek person myself, I have to ask what sorts of creatures that originate from Greek mythology and folk have you adapted to your game?
Honest, I went with the ones we all know, the traditional ones, your centaurs, your satyrs, your dryads. I didn't do a lot I haven't been able to do a lot of work into Greek folklore, partly because just the physical time limit of trying to do all this research, it's hard. And the other thing as well, I found that you can find libraries of books on Greek mythology, but Greek folklore is actually so much harder to find, you know.
True,
The
true,
stories
true.
the stories were not as well preserved. I mean, I don't know how much of that was because of the Ottoman Turks and what happened there, but when you get it outside of mythology and into folklore, it's so much harder to find good quality research material. And for me, I'm always trying to go for my primary sources. I like so much of my of what I've used, so much of my library, and I have a literal library of folklore, you know. At least half the books in my library are books that were written by academics, you know. The other half by wonderful authors who are folklorists, but you know, not in an academic sense, but like it's literally 50% of it is wonderful collections of folklore. Some of them are reproductions of historical collections like your Grimm brothers and so forth, your Calvoni, and then other ones are stuff that modern authors have produced through their own research. But then I'm like spending €70 on a book on Slavic vampire folklore written by a professor of Slavic folklore who moved to the United States and still teaches it in university, you know. um, I've spent a lot of money on books over the last 10 years.
Uh, I have to say one of my favorites from Greek folklore, as you mentioned, and not mythology like the centaurs and the cyclopses and all the things from Homer and all the ancient Greeks. Not from like modern Greek, but still folklore, is like the Mora. It's a spirit, which is basically our twist of the succubus idea, which is like a sleep paralysis demon or spirit, you know, that
Okay.
but it's in the form of an old lady instead of a hot young woman, I guess, the modern depiction of a succubus. And they, you know, it's the same idea that you wake up and they're on your chest and they like kind of they possess you stuff. Because it's fascinating to me because I actually met a person in my life who actually had, you know, sleep problems, and they kinda manifest in that way. Obviously, she was educated and she was aware of that, but still, she would see an actual old lady sitting on the top of her chest that she couldn't breathe when she was having this crisis, you know.
Night hags appear
Night
across
hags, yeah.
all of Europe. In every culture, you have examples of magical creatures who are all fall under the classification of a night hag. They would appear pinning you down, sitting on the chest, paralyzing you when you woke up. In many of the stories, they have this kind of succubus or vampiric ability draining your life force, but there's such a wonderfully common trope that we see in folklore. And that's one of the things that also really fascinated me when I was doing my research, was that, I mean, in the official Fey Earth core rulebook, which, please God, if the gods are smiling, will be finally published sometime next year. I am currently working on it with my team of artists and editors. But when it finally comes out, there's going to be approximately 100 creatures in the bestiary, okay? These are all distinct, unique, magical creatures from European folklore, from basically from Ireland all the way to Russia, you know? But one thing that I very quickly found in my folklore was how often you find the same creature appearing in different countries and different regions with different names, but with the exact same abilities, behavior, personality, appearance. I mean, like, so like going back to the kobold, when you read the descriptions of the kobold, it's incredibly similar to descriptions of a Scottish brownie or the hobgoblin from Yorkshire, you know, or the cadet from France. You know, these are all almost identical. They are all described as being these tiny, diminutive creatures, varying in height from maybe 30 to 90 centimeters, but still always small, They are always or nearly always invisible. They are all described as being incredibly physically strong. So you have your German kobold ripping a lad's arm off to beat him to death with it. The Scottish brownies that were said to be able to, in one night, thrash the same amount of wheat as 10 men. And the other thing you often find, and it doesn't matter whether you're talking Scots, the French, the Germans, in these stories, if you gifted one of these creatures an item of clothing, they would leave your home. So we now go back to that very well-known story of the elves and the shoemaker.
And it makes you wonder. Makes you wonder, like, was it a case of parallel thinking in regions where no like modern communication, like a telephone or like say, social media posting or whatever was at play? So was it a case of parallel thinking, or did all those entities actually in one way or form exist and people had similar, or they had like mass schizophrenia across the different areas and they all look the same? It's fascinating. However, we're not going to solve it today, the two of us. But it's still very, very fascinating how this actually works.
But what that's meant was, when I'm making my stat blocks for certain creatures in the opening paragraph of description of the creature stat block, I might have 2, 3, 4, 5 or more names in literally the first 2 sentences, all for what is the same stat block. Because I'm like, so for the example, for my domestic Fey, as I describe, I don't have a separate stat block for brownies and hobgoblins and kobolds. They all come under one stat block, but in my description I talk about how, depending on what part of Europe you're in, they have these different. I do make reference to the fact that they're minor regional difference. So one being the Irish and Scottish fairies were vulnerable to iron. This is another very common trope that we get in popular culture. Everything's, the Fae are vulnerable to iron. No, they fucking weren't. The only cultures in which we explicitly see people saying that the fairies were vulnerable to iron was in Ireland and in Scotland. That's it. Nowhere else in Europe does this occur. But what happened was, you have these authors in the United States, many of whom can trace their ancestry back to Ireland and Scotland, using that folklore as the basis for the books, but then they apply to everything in the world they were creating. I was like, no. So in my stat block for my domestic Fae, I will say explicitly that if you're dealing with a brownie in Scotland, they are vulnerable to iron. If you're dealing with a cadet in France, they are not vulnerable to iron. So if you find yourself in a fight with one of these creatures and you don't know your regional differences, and you're thinking, oh, it's okay, guys, I have some iron bullets, I'm sorry, my friend, you're gonna have a bad day.
Although I find the setting the most fascinating part of it all, let's talk a little bit about the system of Fey Earth. You're using a D20 system, right?
Yes. It's a D20 system. Now, the reason I went with, it's kind of funny, if I was going to do it again today, I think I'd go with a dice bowl system, because between when I started working on Fey Earth and now, I have fallen so much in love with dice bowl systems. I love them so much. But when I first started making Fey Earth, I went with a D20 system for a number of reasons. One being that D20 was the mechanics I was most familiar with. My background to gaming and TTRPGs, I'm very old, I'm in my mid-40s. My introduction to TTRPGs was 2nd edition Dungeons and Dragons in the 90s. Okay, so that's a long time ago. Okay, so my experience of gaming systems, I played a few other systems, but D20 was A, what I was most familiar with. B is the simple fact that Dungeons and Dragons dominates this hobby. It makes up 90+% of all the games that people play. So if people are going to come to your game and play it and have experience gaming, overwhelmingly their experience will be with Dungeons and Dragons. So I felt, by creating a game that uses a D20 system, you're coming from a game with similar mechanics, which makes it easier for you to make that leap. A big problem that we have in the game, and I could rant about this for ages, is people who've played Dungeons and Dragons saying, I don't have the time to learn another system. Like, bitch, please, you wasted 6 months playing one of the most stupidly written, badly designed, overly complex TTRPG systems that exists in this world. Some of the greatest TTRPGs I've ever played is 5 pages. You can learn another fucking system. So sorry for my mini rant, but that was the reason why I went with D20. I also, when it comes to D20, I've always loved the critical fail, critical success that you get with D20. I mean, as I said, my day job, I'm a maths teacher. I teach mathematics to teenagers, so I have a very good understanding of statistics and probability. So I understand the standard deviations and mean bell curves of a D20 system versus a dice pool system. D20s are a lot more swingy. But yes, I went with a D20 system. However, because I am also a maths teacher and I work in a school for disadvantaged kids coming from very poor socioeconomic backgrounds, and a lot of them have pretty severe learning difficulties, I am also aware of the difficulties people have with maths. So one thing I'm very proud of is the fact that I personally think I've created the best D20 system that's ever been written by anybody, simply because it is a wonderfully simple system. It is one of the simplest D20 systems I've ever come across. Everything that you do in Fey Earth is an ability check. That's it. Always. So there's none of this, am I doing an attack roll? Am I doing a saving throw? Am I doing an ability check? Am I adding my proficiency modifier? No. Everything in Fey Earth is an ability check, and you are adding between 1 to 3 numbers between 1 and 5.
Okay.
That's it.
Okay.
That is it. Okay. So it's a wonderfully simple system, and people who have played my game, every one of them says the same thing. I had a wonderful moment there recently. I'm very good, dear friends, with an incredible group, and they're a UK actual play called The Damsels in Distress. If you haven't seen them, you need to. They are incredible. They're playing Dungeons and Dragons, which is a system that I can't stand, but I love their actual play because it is set in Regency era England. So you got these 3 amazing actresses, because their background is formally training in acting. These 3 amazing actresses playing young girls, 17, 18 years of age, from noble families in the Regency era, who discover that their fathers are members of this ancient fraternity that fights demons, and their fathers have gone missing, and hilarity ensues. And I love it. It's so amazing. The acting is incredible. It's so gay. It's so unbelievably gay. But you got to check it out. But recently they were having they do these talks around the teapots where they'll talk about an episode that they'd recently played, and one of the players, Morn, she did a D&D one shot set in London in the 1980s, punk London in the 1980s.
Okay.
And they'd all got to play different characters. So Taya, who always plays a spellcaster, was playing a barbarian. Meiji, who plays the barbarian, was playing a spellcaster, and they were all playing these different. And when they were talking about how they felt about it, and they actually said on the channels, like, well, honestly, if we could, we'd just be playing Fey Earth. Because I ran a mini campaign with them. I flew over to Winchester, crashed in their apartment on their couch for 4 or 5 days, and we recorded a 10-episode mini campaign of Fey Earth, and we aired it last year, and it was amazing. But to hear them saying, oh, we just play Fey Earth, because there's like, they love D&D, but they're saying, no, this is such a great system. It's so brilliant. It's so simple. And also, the other thing that is really great about it, and this is something that I kind of borrowed, inspired, robbed from Pathfinder 2nd Edition, was the way action economy in Pathfinder works. So in Pathfinder, you've got 3 actions per turn, and depending on what you're trying to do, the thing you're trying to do might require 1, 2, or 3 actions, depending on how powerful and complex it is. So Fey Earth has a similar thing in that you have 1 major action and turn into minor actions. Your major action is your standard, like, action. You shoot your gun, you swing your sword, you cast a spell. The minor actions is for everything else, though. If you want to move, that's a minor action. If you're reloading a firearm, that also causes a minor action. If you want to do a reaction, that's a minor action. So if you've got a character who has reaction abilities, you'll save a minor action on your turn, so later in the initiative order something happens, you have that unspent minor and you can now react. And what that does is it gives you so much more freedom in combat in what your character can do. You don't have the situation that you get in, using the example Dungeons and Dragons, where you've got an action, a movement, and a bonus action.
Yep.
But
And the
bonus actions are and the reaction. But bonus actions are really shit for most of the classes. Like the martial classes have nothing with their bonus actions. Bards can do some cool stuff. Sorcerers can do some cool stuff. But everybody else, okay, druids can wild shape, I think, but it's like, it's really shit, Whereas in my game, it's like you've got your minor actions. You can do so many things with the minor actions. I also have this really fun mechanic called the feat mechanic, where you'll train in special moves. So you've got combat feats, magic feats, dex feats, and social feats. So if you're trying to attack, you might use a heavy blow feat, so you'll do an extra bit of dice damage, or a parry, or with your spells, a quicking spell, so you can cast another first level spell, But that's the other great thing, is like you can train in these feats, which are these special moves. The mechanic was inspired by the stories from mythology of the hero who is famous for this special move they could do with their sword, or with their spear, or with their magic. And I love the idea of you being able to pick a special move that fits with your character, that you train in, and then you can decide to use it in your turn to augment your so that is the big thing actually that makes my system really stand out. That, beyond just the general flexibility you get with the way I've dealt with action economy, but when people have played the game, they've all, like, the first thing they all say is, "We love your magic system. It's so simple and easy to understand." And then, because I just use spell points, man, it's very simple, none of the spell slots crap, it's like, "Your magic system is so easy to understand, it's great." And then the second thing everybody says is, "We love your action economy. I have so many more things I can do on my turn. I'm not just hitting them with the sword or chucking a fireball, or there's so many things I can do." And like, that was the thing when I was making Fey Earth. The thing that I wanted to do was create a game which, first of all, was mechanically simple and easy to understand. As somebody who has a background teaching mathematics to people who have a lot of difficulties with numeracy, whether it's dyscalculia or dyslexia, or just being bad at mathematics, that was really important to me. But also wanted to create a system whereby you can create a really customized character. So, as an example of that, I'm currently in the middle of recording a game. Oh, have I frozen? I think are we okay?
Audio is fine. Visual is frozen, actually. It's sort of coming back, I think.
Yeah, because your video is fine. I don't know what's happening.
Yeah, and also your audio is fine.
Okay, super. Well, we don't need to look at my pretty face, as long as we can hear me. Okay,
I'm currently trying to come back. It's trying to come back.
Oh, okay, right. I can try and lower the resolution if we need to. Yeah, I'm currently recording a series with a wonderful, incredible cast of players. This is a pre-recorded series which will be coming out probably sometime in March next year, which I've called The Witch's Trials. It's heavily inspired by the Marvel TV series Agatha, All Along, that wonderful show, and in this series, I've got a party of players who are all witches. They're all the same class, the witch class in my game. Now, the witch class in my game is based on my research and study of European folk magic. So the witches in my game have access to unique lists of spells called ritual spells, and they also have the ability to create these amulets that give them boons and bonuses. Every single spell that is unique to the witches and every amulet that is unique to the witches, I can give you the specific example from folklore, from academic papers, or from existing museum pieces in collections of European folk magic that spell or amulet is based on, down to the material components that those specific spells use. They're the only spells that use material components. But I've got this wonderful, we've been cursed by the scheduling gods. We've had 2 sessions so far and had to cancel 2 sessions. You know how it is. Scheduling is the
I do.
ultimate BBEG. But I've got a party of 5 amazing players who are all playing the same class, but they are completely different because of how much scope you have to customize and tailor your character in my system.
Let's get back to your actual plays and live streams in a bit. First, I
Yes.
would like to take a detour from all the cool and fantasy and systemical stuff to about more financial and commercial and monetization stuff and running a business, which I know as a game creator, it's not what you signed up for, but it's essential. And your journey with Fey Earth have been quite a journey with twists and turns and cancellations. And cancellation has been a topic for discussion with my team and other teams that I've talked about. Should I cancel and launch later? Should I stick to the very end and maybe, risk everything? And you also have experience with both BackerKit and Kickstarter, and also running supplements for 5 editions. So you have lots and lots of things that you can share with us about your crowdfunding experience as a whole. Which of those topics would you like to further
Oh
elaborate?
God. They're all painful to discuss, to be honest with you.
Choose like
It's
two
like,
of the four and let's go with them or something. It's okay.
I mean, and like, what people don't realize is just how difficult it is, okay? Crowdfunding is so hard. And when you're trying to crowdfund an indie TTRPG, it is 10 times harder. If what you're making is for 5th edition Dungeons and Dragons, you're not guaranteed success, but the success is so much easier, okay? I when I tried to initially run a crowdfunder for Fey Earth on Kickstarter, and this was to raise the money so I could produce the actual core rulebook. First crowdfunder was a complete disaster and it failed. The second crowdfunder, we got in just barely on the last day and succeeded in our funding. Now, I would also like to point out, when I say succeeded in our funding, we raised 10,000 euros on that Kickstarter. My art budget alone for my core rulebook is 12,000 euros.
I completely know what you're talking about. We have a similar experience as well.
Yeah.
Reaching your Kickstarter goal does not mean you've paid for all the expenses of the
No.
initial and
So,
long-term investment.
Now, I've talked to people before said, "Oh, well, you just didn't put the target for your Kickstarter high," and I was like, I barely managed to get 10,000 euros. Just because you decide, oh, I'll kind of give myself a target of 20, 30,000 euros doesn't mean you'll magically get that money. The reality is, I think it's something like 80, 90% of people fail the first time they run a Kickstarter. And then the success rate for Kickstarters after that is still only something like 30-40%, especially if it's an indie TTRPG and not 5th edition. So I was happy to get to 10,000, but it was so incredibly hard because so much of your time is spent marketing. I did run a backer kit campaign there. Oh, actually, I ran a Kickstarter campaign earlier in the year, which failed, and then I decided to move over the backer kit and try it again, and it also failed again. Now, I'm going to say for this one, I really didn't kill myself trying to promote it. But at the same time, for this other campaign, and this was for a 5th edition supplement, I ran 2 one-shots, one with some really well-known North American TTRPG streamers, and the other with some extremely well-known European TTRPG creators. So these are like well-known people. I had a pretty consistent marketing campaign, and I was interviewed on, I think, 3 or 4 separate podcasts. I did everything you do, you know. I also paid for advertising on a number of different podcasts, and it still failed, you know. And it wasn't even that high a number. Now, I'm not too worried about that one. That was for a project I've been working on called Hidden Folk of the Feywild, which is essentially a 5th edition supplement where I've taken all of the creatures that you find in Fey Earth and rewrote them with stat blocks to use in your 5e game. Okay? So the thing about this particular project is it's not actually costing me anything to produce, because all the artwork that will go into Hidden Folk of the Feywild I've already paid for my own Fey Earth core rulebook. You get me? So the money that I was trying to raise on my crowdfunding campaign was literally just to raise the money to be able to produce physical copies of this book. The book is still going to come out. It'll just come out as a PDF. So it's still going to come out. It won't cost me anything as a PDF. And actually, my plan for it is, and this was not my idea, I was talking to a wonderful creator, Emily, is it Greymore? She produced the wonderful game, The Cunning Folk, a delightful game where you play Fey up to mischief, a really great game. And I was chatting to her because she has experience of, she had released The Cunning Folk as a PDF only game, and it was out for a year or two, and then she launched a Kickstarter to raise money to be able to physically print the book. And she made the wonderful suggestion, which I am going to be doing, of producing zines of creatures. So the first zine that I'm going to be doing, I'm waiting a little bit of artwork, and once that's done, I'll be releasing it. Will be just what I'm calling, I can't remember, it's like Little Folk. So it's a zine of about 12 creatures from European folklore, but they're all tiny little diminutive creatures. So you've got your fairies, your Anchutka, your Aikos, all the tiny cute little kabouters, which are a type of Flemish gnome. So all of the leprechauns, the small little guys, okay? And then I'm gonna have a zine of forest fae. I'm gonna be doing a zine of just femme fae, so just feminine fae creatures. And then I will eventually have the entire book. So I'll have these zines that will be selling for somewhere probably between €5 and €8 each. Or you could buy the PDF of the whole book for €20, you know? But yeah, it's so difficult. People do not realize and this is the hardest thing about being a TTRPG creator is 90% of your time and energy is not spent on creating TTRPG content. If you want to be successful, 90% of your time and energy is spent on marketing.
That's about right. Unfortunately, it
Yeah.
has nothing to
Yeah.
do with all the creative stuff. You have to change hats, and usually
Yeah.
the most hats that you wear, not the mythology and design and imagination, are like, how the hell I'm gonna monetize this? I unfortunately I know.
I mean, it's if you're lucky, maybe you can develop a strong Patreon community of supporters, and that can be really great. If you can have a Patreon that's like even a couple of €100 a month, it's not huge amounts of money, but that can actually make a huge difference. You know, I
The
mean, to
company
put it into
expenses and stuff.
yeah, or like just even artwork, like a standard artwork commission is 150 to €200, depending on the size and complexity of the piece. You know, so if you're getting 150, €200 a month from Patreon, that's a piece of art that now can go into your game. Because this is the other thing that is a frustrating reality of being a TTRPG producer, is that so many consumers have this unreasonable demand of incredibly wonderfully produced high quality work full of art, but they don't want to pay for it. You know, that's the reality. They want this artwork that is costing you as a creator thousands and thousands of euros, unless you are an artist yourself, but they don't want to give you the money to support that. So that's where the challenge gets in. That's where you end up looking into alternative revenue sources like your Patreons, like having lots of small little games and products, €2, €3, €5 stuff that you can be selling and generating small amounts of income, that you've got small but consistent and reliable sources of income that can actually make a huge difference. In terms of Kickstarter versus BackerKit, unfortunately, my BackerKit campaign wasn't successful, but I will say I really liked Backer. I liked the vibe of BackerKit more. I felt like I had more flexibility as a creator in how I set up the project. I did have some trouble actually physically setting it up. It was just some annoying back-end technical problems. But when I contacted their customer services, they responded like within 24 hours. They had responded, and they were amazing.
And
They,
Kickstarter is notoriously bad in
yeah,
support.
yeah. So that alone is a reason why, for future projects, I'll be leaning way more towards BackerKit. You know,
Interesting.
but at the same time, like I know there was an article there recently in Rascal or maybe one of the other publications talking about how terrible Kickstarters have been doing this year. Like consistently across the board, Kickstarters have been doing really bad this year. A lot of Kickstarters are failing, or they're just barely hitting their funding goals. They're not getting past it into stretch goal territories, and it's just like people basically just don't seem to have the money. And you have another problem. I just saw an article there today, came out on Rascal News. Magpie Games, who've done
Yeah.
Avatar and a bunch of other things, they had launched a Kickstarter for a pack of 3 card games that they were going to release, and they actually cancelled the Kickstarter. They stopped the Kickstarter and cancelled it before it completed, even though it was funding successfully, because what they discovered was, with all of the tariffs that Donald Trump has brought in, because the printers they're using are all based in China, that these tariffs were going to increase their production costs by over 100%. So even if they'd gotten the Kickstarter funded, it wouldn't have actually funded the project. So they've just completely cancelled their project outright.
Wow.
Um,
And we're talking about Magpie Games, like not you and I or this and the
yeah,
other guy, you
like
know?
we're talking Magpie Games. I mean, they're not Hasbro, but they're a well-respected
No,
company that's
they're
been
pretty,
around.
yeah, yeah,
They're
pretty
they're
big.
pretty they're big enough, you know. And they were like, yeah, because of Donald Trump's tariffs, we did the maths and we can't produce this card game.
Yeah, especially the board game industry, card games, you know, strategy games, whatever. The board game has even have been hit by the tariffs much more than our industry has. But yeah, let's not go there. I have another questions about. It's a more personal kind, but I'm curious if you want to answer it. Were your expectations much more higher and much more ambitious, should I say, when you said, I'm gonna now create a 5e supplement? So in a way, I'm not, you know, paving my own path with my indie ideas. I'm following a well-followed road. So shouldn't we go, absurdly well with a 5e supplement? Or
Honestly,
were you more grounded? Were you surprised?
Honestly, and I'm going to sound a little bit bitter here. I was expecting to succeed, because the reality is, if you go on a Kickstarter and just do a Google search for D&D Feywild, you find so many projects that have been hugely successful, raising, 3, 4, 500% of their target goals. And you look at the projects, and some of them are really shit. And I was like, I'm producing this incredible supplement that is full of Fey for your Feywild campaign, that have all come from Folklore. This is nothing like the bullshit that other people are just making up because they think it sounds cool and sexy. So I was expecting, I wasn't expecting to raise tens of thousands of euros, but I was expecting to at least hit my funding goal. I think it was only something like 5,000. It wasn't even a big number, So yeah, I was a bit pissed off that it didn't succeed, because of the simple fact that I was like, well, it's the most popular TTRPG IP out there, and it is one of the most popular topics within this TTRPG. People go nuts about stories of fairies and fae in the Feywild, and I was like, it seemed like an obvious one to me. So I was expecting it to do well. Now, as I've said, I mean, on the one hand, I did literally all the things that you should be doing to promote a Kickstarter. As I said, running one-shots with some fairly big names, doing interviews, all of that stuff. The only thing I didn't do was
pay 20k on ads on something like Zelop or this and that company. Isn't that right? Were you going to say something like that? Because I think all the other companies and projects that you mentioned that even have like pale in comparison in the research amount that you have done, is that they pay the shitload, X amount of money in their marketing budget for ads, where they already have or they didn't run them themselves. They pay the company that ran ads that already has all the metrics and the stats that are much more powerful than any interview, any actual play. So unfortunately, I think that is the case. I don't know if you were going to agree with that, but I think...
No, because that is one thing, because for my for the Fey Earth Kickstarter for the core rulebook, I did put money into ads on Facebook and Instagram, like, and stuff like that. You know, I wasn't spending thousands of euros, but I did spend a bit of money on ads, and I didn't purchase ads for this Feywild 5e supplement. So that is something I
Hmm.
didn't do. You know, but at the same time, I did actually put a lot more organic effort into promoting it, you know, through my one shots and my interviews. So I was like, that, as I say, that was really frustrating. I mean, at the end of the day, I'm not going to waste my time and my energy getting angry and bitter about it. The book will still be published eventually as a PDF. And if people contact me bitching about, well, why can't I get a physical copy? My answer will be because you didn't back my crowdfunding campaign.
Yeah, and there's always another chance to do it or go with that zines idea that you had, which might
Yeah.
actually work even to your benefit.
Mm.
But yeah, as I said, I really know about how difficult it is and how it doesn't has to do with your research or the quality of your work or the organic marketing that you put in. Sometimes about, unfortunately, I wish it wasn't, with how much money you give to non-organic ads like paid ads,
Mm.
and especially if you had like a company that's gonna take care of the whole process, but those companies require like some huge amounts of money, or
Yeah.
like you have like 5 ongoing projects that have reached X and Y and Z goals.
Mm.
Anyway, let's close this huge parenthesis of all the not so fun stuff, and let's wrap things up with a more positive note. Let's talk about your actual play shows, your live streams, and the wonderful community around Fey Earth you've had. I've seen some your recent show on like that, you know, the one that you uploaded 1 month ago or so. You have an amazing cast of players, really into it. Your GM skills are up there. So let's talk about actual plays, live streams, communities, and your community.
Well, I suppose my live streaming has been a bit more sporadic. I was running a weekly long form actual play for 2 years that ended in January, and that was hard work. That was really hard work. People do not realize the amount of time and energy that goes into running a weekly actual play that you're playing live. Okay, and once I've finished, I've done a couple of things, but it's all been pre-recorded. The most current thing I've been doing was actually a fifth edition game. It was supposed to be promoting the crowdfunding for my 5e supplement, and that's a fun adventure in the Feywild, and I have an amazing cast of players. We're nearly done, but yet again, the goddamn scheduling gods. You know, we have like one, maybe two episodes left in this story, but people were busy and people were sick, and we ended up, like, we should have been finished in early October, but we had to kept keep canceling sessions and because stuff was happening. So we've got a date locked in for our next session, and then we'll probably have one more after that, and that campaign will be finished. And that's been a really fun campaign. So much fun. I've had an amazing cast of players for that. You know, some really wonderful people who do appear in a lot of other games, um, on a whole host of different shows. So that's been great. Even though we are using fifth edition, which as a system is I really I can't stand 5e on so many for so many reasons. I really can't stand it as a system. Not just because they've culturally appropriated everything and they've got a proud history of misogyny and sexism. The maths is what pisses me off the most. The actual maths behind how the system works. As a maths teacher who teaches people who struggle with numbers, oh my god, it's such a terribly designed system. But nonetheless, we've been playing it and having fun. So hopefully, please God, we'll have that finished by the end of the year. We just have to get 2 more sessions out, and then I've got my Witches campaign, which we're currently recording, and will hopefully launch in March. But when that does launch, that will be a weekly series. It's going to be between 8 to 10 episodes, and that's got, oh my God, if you think my cast from my Feywild campaign is good, the cast I have for this Witches campaign, it's called the Witches Trials. It is the best cast of players I've ever had the pleasure of working with. And I've
Wow.
worked with some amazing players. Okay, like this is just, I can't believe I had all these amazing people agree to play with me. And that's like the basic premise of that game is the stat story is very simple. It's a group of witches who all go on this mythic witches trial, which is a story that's shared amongst witches of this magical quest that they go on, in which they will face a number of different trials that could kill them, traveling across different sites across Europe. And if they succeed and complete the witch's trials, they will find themselves at the hut of the Baba Yaga and
Ooh.
can ask her to take them as apprentices.
Oh, wow. Isn't that a spoiler?
So,
Isn't that the ending or so? Or is that the premise?
well, that's the premise. We don't know if they're gonna all survive.
That
So
that
yeah,
sounds absolutely enticing
yeah,
and
yeah.
epic. And
So
with your
so
level
that
of research, I think it's gonna be an amazing Witches
yeah.
Coven experience.
Yeah, so it's been, and I'm not gonna lie. One of the things I love about it is, and it's something that I've done before. I did it when I was playing with the damsels, and I've done it in my own other actual plays. Is anytime I get a chance to do a lore drop, and as I said, because the witch class in my game is so heavily based on my own personal research of European witchcraft and folk magic, they just, as a class, they just come alive in a way I've never seen with any other spellcaster class. They have this authenticity to them and this realism to them that you don't get when you're playing casters. But like, you're casting these spells and you're describing the material components, and like some of these material components are really specific. So like there's one amulet that they can have, a witch can create, called a mandrake shield, which it's a defensive amulet that helps um protect them when they're against attacks. And it's a small pouch, inside of which is a piece of mandrake root, which must have been collected under a hangman's gallows and is pierced with iron nails from the hangman's gallows and bound with rope from the hangman's noose. And this is something that actually we did have in folklore. Um, the executioners, they were as a class, they were somewhat vilified across Europe. People wouldn't like, often executioners would intermarry with tanners who worked with leathers because they were the only people they would associate with. So they had this very important role in society, but they were feared and viewed as outsiders. And one way that executioners would actually make a bit of extra money, because if you worked as an executioner, you were only paid when you carried out an execution. So if they were like, so you still have a family to feed, and one way they would actually make extra money was they would sell nails from their gallows and strands of rope from their nooses to actual witches, that they would take those items and use in their amulets and their spells of protection.
Wow.
So I have an amulet in my game that the witch can create, which is a protective amulet using these ingredients that is coming directly from Europe. Like, so that's the level of detail that you can expect in Fey Earth.
Neil, it has been an absolute pleasure. Your depth of knowledge is astounding, and I'm wishing you all the best for the next chapter of your endeavors. Final message to all your fans before we wrap it up and sign us off.
I guess the best thing is just follow me on Blue Sky. That's where I'm most active. I technically still have a Twitter account because I didn't delete it so that no one else could steal it. But apart from the odd scheduled promo posts, I do not use Twitter. I refuse to call it X. You can find me on Blue Sky. You can find me on itch.io. I actually just published a game there the other day as part of the Folklore Jam that's being organized by WH Author and a few others. A really, really fun, it's free to download, solo RPG called Three Nights Till Samhain, in which you play a farmer in the west of Ireland trying to deal with local fairies who've suddenly started making your life difficult. And it's Three Nights Till Ihasaw on Halloween. And it's a very fun solo RPG using cards in which you're trying to draw cards to create charms and amulets of protection while dealing with the various Fey and fairies that will meet you. So really fun game if you want to try it. I've got a kind of beta starter pack version of Fey Earth on my itch.io page as well. I technically have a Patreon, but I haven't done anything in that in ages. But I am going to be soon launching new content on my Patreon. I will be every month producing at least one, possibly two stat blocks if time will allow it. And each stat block will be for a specific creature that you would find in Fair. So a specific feature from Folklore, but the stat blocks that for the creatures will be written for 5th edition Dungeons and Dragons, Pathfinder 2nd edition, Call of Cthulhu, Daggerheart, and Monster of the Week. So I will have 5 stat blocks for 5 different systems for the same creature being produced every month that you, as a Patreon, could bring into your games. So that's going to be a really, really cool resource that you can bring into your games. And as I said, none of these are creatures that I've made up. These are all creatures that have been in stories shared for centuries. Beyond that, follow me on Twitch so you'll get notifications of my shows. I've got our Feywild campaign finishing up soon, and in the new year, I've got some really fun stuff planned as well.
This has been a most informative and amazing talk. Thank you so much again for joining us, Neil. And as always, everyone, stay legit and stay meta.